All right.
Hi, Megan.
Admitting.
All right. Well, it looks like everyone is in from the waiting room, so we're going to get going. This is the May 5th meeting of the Portland Clean Energy Fund Grant Committee. And we're just going to start by going over a little bit of housekeeping, the virtual participation check and guidelines for public participation. These meetings are open to the public, and we are streaming live on YouTube. One note about that, and this is more for committee members, just to know that if you are unmuted and you make noise, it does sometimes change where the sort of camera decides to go and what decides to get displayed. And then when we go on the break, for sure you'll want to shut your camera off during that time. So there is a chat box that is open to everyone right now, and I'd invite everyone who is attending, who's a member of the public, to put your name, and if you have an organizational affiliation you want to share and gender pronouns that you want to share, put those in there now, and then we can read those off to sort of get a better sense of who's in the virtual room. I will be asking committee members and the staff who are actively participating in this meeting to introduce themselves. Staff who are just observing, if you can go ahead and just introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. We do ask that members of the public and folks not actively participating in the meeting turn their cameras off. It makes it just a little bit easier to keep things organized on the Zoom screen. There is an opportunity for public comment. And if you want to give public comment, that'll be, well, it won't be at 6:05 because we start a few minutes late. So it'll be a few minutes after that. But if you want to provide public comment, just go ahead and indicate that you want to do that by saying so in the chat box. And then we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself. And if you want to turn your camera on, you can do that at that time. Otherwise, for this meeting, the public is asked to observe and listen, and as always, reach out directly to PCEF staff or participate in other opportunities for public engagement and providing input and feedback. Just another reminder that this meeting is being recorded, and there's also live transcription available. So there's closed captioning, and you can find that by going to the menu bar. If you're on Zoom, going to the Zoom menu bar and scrolling over to where there are those three little dots, and then clicking that, and you'll get the drop-down menu, and then you'll find the option to be able to view the transcription. So those are the sort of basic housekeeping items, and we're going to I'm going to ask Maria Sippin to our committee member to open the meeting today before we move into introductions. Maria?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I want to open the meeting today by acknowledging that it is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit Awareness Day. Indigenous women are 10 times more likely to be murdered than the national average, and a murder is the third highest cause of death for Indigenous women. In 2016, there were 5,712 known incidents of missing or murdered Native American women. Only 116 of these cases were logged into the Department of Justice database. According to the Urban Indian Health Institute, when information on missing Indigenous persons is collected, law enforcement often omits or misclassifies racial data, making it difficult to assess the true extent of the violence. The Sovereign Bodies Institute is an organization that, according to their website, builds on Indigenous traditions of data gathering and knowledge transfer to create, disseminate, and put into action research on gender and sexual violence against Indigenous people. The SBI is the only centralized database that logs cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people from 1900 to the present. Research using this data has established a strong connection between the extraction industry and violence toward Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. From the Native women's wilderness, environmental degradation, systemic racism, economic inequalities, and social injustices are deeply connected to the same root causes, capitalism and colonialism. We must look more deeply at these connections and use the knowledge of them to inform our activism. Ending the crises of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people requires ending the era of fossil fuels. I want to take a moment now for us to just tune in to our somatic senses and what is coming up for us as we enter this virtual room today, what we're bringing to the space, how we're feeling, and what we really need to make it through the end of the night. Please do what you need to do to take care of yourselves. And this means checking in with how your body's feeling, turning off your mics and videos as you need, and even chatting our staff and moderators if there's something we can do to accommodate you in the agenda. And if we have time at the end, we'll also recognize anything else we want to commemorate, like May Day, which just passed us, as we celebrate workers, the past struggles, and how we fight for those same struggles today. And even Asian American Heritage Month, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in all of May. And we've all got lots of things to contribute and commemorate all through the year. And if there's any way we can make space for that in these meetings, please let us know. Thanks.
Thanks, Maria. So before we'll now do introductions and then move into the agenda. I'm going to mention it now just so everybody hears me so I don't forget. We are going to approve minutes before we jump into the agenda and then move on with the rest of the meeting, which we have kind of fallen a little bit behind on, but are definitely going to do that. I want to start with committee member introductions, and we'll start with Megan.
Hi, everybody. Megan Horst, she, her, committee member.
Michael?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Eden Hill, he, him, committee member and co-chair.
Maria?
Maria Sippen, committee member, she or they pronouns.
Robin?
Good evening, Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
Faith?
Hi, everyone. Faith Graham, she, her pronouns, committee member. And Maria, thank you so much for lifting that up and opening the space in that way.
Shanice?
Thank you. Hello, Shanice Clark, she, her pronouns, committee member.
Thanks, Shanice. Your volume is a little bit low, so for the next time that you see, but I think we're able to catch that. Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Moreland, committee member, he, him.
And our two other committee members, Ramses and Amanda, are running a little bit late, so we'll keep an eye out and then just ask them to introduce themselves once they arrive. So moving on to staff, I'm just, like I said, going to introduce staff who are actively participating in the meeting, and we'll start with Lockie Au, who is our tech lead tonight, and who is the person who, if you're a member of the public and you have a question, please shoot those over to Lockie or run into any sort of technical difficulties. Lockie?
Hey everyone, Lockie Au, PCEF staff, she, they pronouns.
Thanks, Lockie. Janet?
Good evening, everybody. Janet Hammer, she, her pronouns, PCEF staff.
Angela? You're muted, Angela.
Yes, Angela Prividelli, PCEF staff, she, her pronouns.
And I'm Katie Lister, PCEF staff, and I'm going to turn it over to Sam. And Sam, ask you to introduce yourself and introduce the folks in the chat box.
Great. Sam Brasso, PCEF staff, he, him. And before I jump to staff, the box, I will just also introduce who it's Jason Ford just started this week on Monday as a PCEF finance manager. And so Jason's right down. You get to see Jason, but we're not going to put Jason on the spot just yet. It is just day number 3, but welcome Jason and team, and I hope you all get to see more of Jason as we continue. So, and then moving to our list, we got Zach Snyder, he, him from Solar Oregon, James Valdez on the PCEF staff, he, him, June Reyes on the PCEF staff, she, her, Jenny Hall, she, her from Energy Trust of Oregon, the solar program, Deidre Schutz, she, her from Nutrition Garden RX, Jay Richmond, from the PCEF staff, they, them. Jeff Hammerlund, semi-retired professor on clean energy policy at PSU and former professor of James Valdez, one of my favorite students of all time. Ryan Nielsen, Laborers International Union of North America District Council, he, him. Micah Mescal, he, him, Portland Audubon. Lori Bauman, Liuna, gender fluid. Derek Thompson, co-chair Leaders Become Legends, culture advocate with Lines for Life.
Thanks, Sam. So just moving then right into the agenda, before this is, the agenda is up on the screen. Everybody has received it. All the committee members, you all received it in your sort of meeting materials packets, and it's also available online. We're running a tiny bit behind, but we do need to pause for a moment and see if everyone has had a chance to review the meeting minutes, the last sort of 5 meeting minutes that we had fallen behind, going from January through the middle of April, and if there were any edits, changes, corrections that needed to be made to those minutes. And if not, I would ask for them to be approved. All right. Seeing no edits or corrections, we're going to call those meeting minutes approved and commit to do a better job keeping up with those, so that we don't have so much reading to do all at once. So the next thing on the agenda is public comment. I didn't see anyone signed up in the chat for public comment, and nobody signed up using the online forum. So we're going to move on to the next topic, which is the mini grant program. And Angela Previdelli is the PCEF staff who's going to be heading up this program. But I just wanted to do a couple of reminders before turning it over to Angela to sort of walk you through the presentation. You will recall that. Yeah.
I know Michael had a comment earlier that wanted to raise, and I think
Oh, did we have a raised hand?
Angela's
Did I miss?
Came in through. It came in through. There we go.
Oh, now it's back. Michael, you're muted, Michael.
Let's try that again. Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me talk really quick, Katie.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that your newly elected co-chairs, Maria and myself, will be reaching out to the rest of the committee members for one-on-one conversations over the next couple weeks, maybe I'll say few weeks, just to sort of touch base, talk about any problems that are happening, any questions you have, anything that's kind of maybe off topic. And so we're going to be reaching out to all the committee members and trying to schedule some time to talk. And that's all.
Thanks, Michael. Anything else? All right. So you all will recall that you you approved a recommendation to City Council for $400,000 for a mini grant program, and kind of the grant committee over the course of a couple of meetings kind of roughed out what that program would look like. After City Council approved those recommendations, it was part of the larger grant recommendation packet. We have sort of gone back in and developed the program detail, and that's what this presentation that Angela will be walking you through tonight is sort of all of that program detail. And we'll be asking for you to for someone to make a proposal. So I just wanted to sort of like put that out there before we started getting into this, that we are asking for a decision tonight to have a proposal to authorize us to launch the program and kind of run the first year of the mini grant program as it's sort of with the level of detail that we now have after the council approval. Assuming, of course, that there aren't changes that you would like to see. If there are, then we can talk those and you can make a proposal to launch it with those amended changes. So I just wanted to kind of frame that out so that folks were paying extra attention during the presentation, and knowing that there was, we had hoped for a decision tonight so that we can launch those. And maybe just one more thing in terms of timing, we do really want to, if we can, we want to make sure that these mini grants are available for kind of prior to the application, the large request for proposals, so that people might be able to use them as a resource to kind of help them prepare their applications, amongst other mini grant program purposes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Angela. And Angela, I have the slide deck, so I'll keep an eye on you, but if I forget to advance, just let me know and I'll advance.
Okay, great. I think you can go ahead and advance. Okay, great. Hi everyone. I'm really excited to be presenting this. I know it's been kind of a long time coming and folks have been asking about it. So I'm really excited to walk you through it all. A little bit about the presentation. I think you've had a chance to look at it previous, but we're gonna be walking through the timeline, how the program is structured, touching on the selection process, and then finishing up with the community feedback that we've received that's helped shape the program, and then opening it up to discussion and decision at the end. If you could just jot down your questions as I'm moving along. Ideally, I'd like to get through most of it just because it sort of, the process builds on itself slide by slide. And then ideally we'd be able to get through all of the questions at the end. Though if you have a burning question and you feel like you need to jump in, please do so. Oh, so now we're already on the timeline. Great, stay right there. So over the last many months, we've been in program design. We are now at that second little setting the seeds into the ground step, which is we've gathered up additional community feedback, and now we're here asking for committee discussion and approval. Hopefully this goes well and we get there tonight. And then next up would be launching it in May, which is the month we are already in. So it would be ideally in about 2 weeks, we'd want to launch it and do a lot of outreach and get it through all of the networks, recognizing that we're going to go through the deadlines, but recognizing that the first deadline would be coming up in July. So we really want to try and push the word out as much as we can for this first quarterly cycle. Like I said, opening the application in mid-May. We're going to run it for 4 quarters, providing quarterly updates to the committee on the progress and sort of, the high level of who has been selected, how the program is going. And then after a year, we're going to go through a performance evaluation of the program, see what needs to be changed, added, edited, and come back to y'all with any sets of changes for approval then. Okay, so a little thing there. Okay, why mini grants? So these are the sort of the top reasons that are driving that originally drove the formation of this, and we've continued to hear it over the last year in terms of what the community is asking for. They're asking for support for their time-sensitive needs. They're asking for grant application support. I'm going to say a little bit more about the application support grants. You'll remember that those were grants that we released ahead of the RFP to build up capacity for orgs to apply in the first RFP. That is being folded into this program because that need has continued. We're still hearing that. That's going to be a core part of this, and we're expanding to include other types of eligible funding activities through this. So I'll talk a little bit more about application support grants and how that experience has helped shape mini grants a little bit later. Another piece is an accessible entry point for orgs who are new to PCEF. So it's sort of trying to get away from using the term pipeline, maybe like an upstream approach of like how we get folks into engaging with PCEF. And yeah, so a variety of other ones there, small projects, like there's capacity building, and then sometimes folks just have small projects and we want to create a way for them to be able to fund those as well. So it's not just really big projects that feel kind of far away from some of the orgs. They can do little bite-sized ones. And of course, capacity building and training is built into this. So those are all of the things that are driving the why we are doing this and help shape how the program looks. So some of the central goals are to be simple and accessible, both the application and the grant process itself, to be responsive to a wide array of time-sensitive needs. And so that's what drives it being a quarterly process. So 4 times a year, we'll be able to select folks and get funding out. And it covers a wide range of activities. And then another key goal is to really support the organizational capacity building. For eligibility, this will look familiar. Nonprofit organization, that includes fiscal sponsor. The requests still need to align with PCEF goals of addressing climate change and advancing racial and social justice. And that question is built into the application. And these requests can't add additional funding if they've gotten other funding. This has to be sort of its own request. It's fine if an organization has other grants going with us. This just needs to be a unique request and not an add-on. And then finally, for eligibility, orgs can only submit a single application per quarterly cycle, but they can apply each cycle if they choose to. We'll get more into how that works in a little bit. Okay, this one's a little dense. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it a little bit closer. But this really just shows a little bit about the application. So we're trying to keep it really light. We're going to collect the organizational info, and then we are going to ask a couple of narrative questions to understand how their request aligns with PCEF goals. And a little bit about what they are asking for, why they're asking for it. We're imagining those around 150 words or less. So again, really brief paragraphs on that. And then getting straight into what is their funding request. So we've broken it out into these expense categories so that it can really marry the why and the sort of the narrative of what they're asking for with the budget that they're asking for, so that we're not requiring all of these separate pieces the way that we've seen sort of in the larger RFP request. So they're going to go through, there's going to be a sort of drop down menu. They can say, I want to buy some stuff. This is what I want to buy and why. And then that's it, and how much I'm asking for. And so they would go through each category, filling that in. You can see there the kinds of examples of eligible expenses. And it's a wider range of things that are, programmatic costs if they want to do a project, host an event, or organizational development costs such as, grant application support or training. And then there on the right, you see some of the key reporting questions. There's going to be a few other reporting requirements, the financial reporting, seeing invoices and pay statements for how the funds were used. But there you see some of the sort of narrative and impact questions that we'll be asking and then reporting on based on what we get. Okay, so to be responsive, it is going to be run quarterly. So you see on the right there, those are the deadlines as we're sort of seeing for the year. We want to sort of get all of those dates out now so that folks can plan ahead and know when to apply, but they can apply at any time. So the application is going to be always open. When folks apply, they'll be placed into the next quarterly cycle. So if they haven't passed the deadline yet, they will be in that cycle. If the deadline passes, they'll be in the next one. They're going to be screened for eligibility, and then we're going to go through the selection process. That's going to be the next slide. If they're not selected, they're going to have the option of being automatically considered as part of the next quarter's selection process if they choose. We recognize that that's not going to work for everyone because some folks have really time-sensitive needs and they're asking inside of that time frame. But for a lot of other folks, they might have a little bit of flexibility, and so we don't want them to have to reapply. We'll be able to just sort of put them into consideration the next go round. Okay. All right. Another dense one here. The selection process. So we're intentionally trying to keep the selection process simple to allow the application process and the granting process to also be simple. And so the key takeaway, the key sort of thesis statement about how this is working is that organizations of all sizes can apply for mini grants as long as they're eligible. And then we're going to prioritize small, being defined as organizations with 3 or less staff, and first-time applicants. Because folks can apply more than once per year, we want to make sure that we're always creating space for first-time applicants to sort of get some priority in there. The way that it'll work is that when folks apply after we pass the deadline, we'll be separating them. We'll do the eligibility screening. We'll separate them into the small group, the larger group, also if they've applied or not. And then we'll do a random selection process to select from that first prioritized group, which in this case would be small organizations who are first-time applicants. If funds remain, then we'll select from the next group, which would be all organizations who are first-time applicants. And then if there's still funding available, we'll select from small groups who have already received funding, and then from all other groups who have already received funding. So it's a sort of tiered system that we're using there while still trying to keep it simple. The reason that we are prioritizing small orgs, you all have talked about this a lot already over the past year. Typically, they lack access to resources. And so we want to be able to lift them up and ensure that they are able to get some of this funding, especially because so much of it is focused on capacity building. We recognize that it's not a perfect proxy, right? There are small organizations that are well-resourced, we know that, but this is the one that we're using for now. And then after a year, we're going to see how it's worked. Has it worked well? Are we getting the kinds of groups that we're hoping to get? And if not, we'll then be able to add additional criteria, recognizing that the more criteria we add, the more complexity is built into it. So we're trying to find that sweet spot between having a process that really works the way we want it to, and having something that's simple and easy to navigate. And so with random selection, I just wanted to note there that we're using that to get away from a lot of the advantages that come with the first come, first serve process, right? So orgs that may be able to plan ahead, that have the capacity to do that, inevitably have an advantage when it comes to first come, first serve dynamic. So instead, we're doing those cutoffs, right? So that July 1st cutoff, everyone will be just sort of placed together, and then we'll go through this prioritization and then do a random selection of folks in each group. We also know that that isn't perfect, but these are the solutions that we're going with now, recognizing that there is no perfect solution for this, but we're going to see how well it works after a year. Okay. Cruising on through to community feedback. So just want to go over a little bit about this, and then I'm going to touch on the application support grants and some of the feedback that we've gotten there. So we conducted a community feedback survey on the sort of draft mini grant program. It was sent out to, I believe, 45 organizations. We received responses from 17. They really ranged. We had, about 6 organizations that were 3 or less staff. We had about 6 organizations that were 4 to 15 staff, and 5 organizations that were 15 or more staff. So we really wanted to get a cross section of how different sized and types organizations felt about the program and how it's being proposed. What you see on the left bottom is a ranking. So part of the survey included a ranking of, these are the types of eligible expenses, which one, ask them to then rank what was most important to that organization in terms of what they were most likely to ask for funding for. As you can see there, the 2 most popular, which are the ones on the left, are both staff time for external work and staff time for internal organizational development. Those are the highest needs, which is interesting to see sort of how things shook out. And the numbers, I don't know if it's clear, but purple is folks that place that as their first choice. Green are organizations that placed that category as their second choice. And then onwards, orange, blue, and yellow. And then in terms, for the one on the right, there's the estimated frequency of applications. So what we're seeing here is that folks are really gonna, are likely to be applying more than once per year, which is good for us to know, and also really speaks to what the demand and need is from the organizations who are going to be applying. Let's see. Other small things are that the majority of them did prefer a web-based application, though we are going to have a PDF or a mail-in version also available. And for all organizations, for 15 of the 17 organizations said it would be highly useful. The 2 that said it would not be very useful were very large organizations that had 500 plus employees. And then finally, communication is key. One thing that was a big takeaway from this is that messaging around who is eligible, how this will work is going to be really important, because there were some messages that folks still had a lot of questions around. Would they be eligible if they were not a small organization, or would they be eligible if this or that? So we gleaned a lot in terms of how we want to message and get ahead of some of the questions that we might be hearing from folks. ASG, last point that I'll have there is, so I've also been managing, since I've started, have been managing the application support grant program, and through that have had lots of one-on-one conversations with those grantees to understand their experience and also their needs. So what's coming through there is that folks, the need for application support resources continues to be great. They're like, great that this happened once. We would love for it to be a regular opportunity. And so that is how that's being responded to here. Another thing that we heard a lot about was insurance requirements being a challenge for folks to navigate. I've done the deepest dive that I could do inside of the world of insurance and requirements at the city, and I'm creating some pathways to help address some of those issues that are coming up. So instead of having a sort of blanket requirement for everyone, we're really going to try to right size the requirements that we have based on the scopes of work to try and decrease the hurdles. You know, we can't get rid of them all the way, because inevitably insurance does also protect grantees depending on what they are doing. So so that's being baked in. And And then another piece that we heard is that folks loved how simple the application process was for application support grants, and they really hope that that continues inside of the mini grant program. And so that's really what's driving trying to keep this as simple as possible while still being accountable to the program. With that, it's discussion time. I can stop talking at you because that was a lot. So there's a discussion question there. I'll read it out loud, but also I want to open this up for any other questions or other discussions that you all want to have about this. So the question is it's shaped here, considering our guiding principles, especially about being community powered, do you feel that the mini grant program will support PCEF's commitment to being responsive to community needs? And then ultimately tonight, we would love to get your approval to launch. If anyone has any amendments that we can incorporate into the program, happy to hear about those. Okay.
Michael?
Can you remind me again what the top amount, what the maximum is for it?
Yeah, so $5,000 per grant. And yeah, so per individual grant. So if someone is applying in different quarters for different requests, those could each be $5,000. They can't really add on to each other, but, and then per quarter, the allocation is going to be $100,000, and then the annual allocation is $400,000.
Any other questions or comments? Megan? And then Ramses?
Thanks, Angela. This is exciting to hear about and like a lot of food for thought. I have a couple questions that might just be clarifying or conversational. I'll just say them all at once. One is, do you think that those buckets like of applications would cover the full gamut of possible, like would there be space for community groups to, or nonprofit orgs, eligible organizations to apply? And what if our categories don't, what if they have another idea? Are we going to be open to that? That's probably an easy one to answer. Another question I have is why, is it just for simplicity's sake, or could you explain why not prioritizing priority orgs with priority populations at the forefront? And then my third question is about the ASG, the Application Support Grants, new acronym there. Is it gonna, that seems like it's gonna be a little complicated to message with the mini grants too, and like the timing has to align with our, so I'm just curious about like, is that gonna be all wrapped up into the same thing? And like, I just could imagine applicants finding that a little confusing, the timing and like the names, and yeah, so I guess I just would love a little bit more insight into that.
Great. Maybe I'll do quick responses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think answering real quick makes sense. And then we have Ramses, Faith, and Maria. I did want to also just flag that it's 6:42. We're supposed to go on break at 6:45, but maybe we can delay the break for 5 or 10 minutes and kind of just shift the agenda a little bit, because but then at that point we may need to call it. So go ahead, Angela.
Okay. For your first question, yes, we definitely want to be able to fund, if it aligns and there's a place for it, we want to have the flexibility to fund it. We just are including those examples as sort of like, this is what we've come up with. In the survey, I also asked if there were things missing, and we really, from the 17 orgs, folks were like, this really covers it. But the door is open if there's something that seems not to be captured, that we should be able to fund it if it aligns with the other eligibility pieces. Why not prioritizing priority communities in the process? So that is a sort of simplicity piece, because we would have to ask for a lot more information in the application to be able to do justice to that process, that selection process. So the current thinking, and this was actually a conversation piece a year ago when you all talked about it, which was, let's try to keep it simple and track and see who is coming through and who is being selected, to see if the process as is working, or if we need to include that criteria and add a little bit of that complexity in there. So that was the conversation that happened then. I'm sort of carrying it through into how it's looking now. But if folks have, you know, feelings about that, please, I'd like to hear it. And then ASG, so application support grants was a one-time thing. Mini grants is going to be ongoing. So there's not going to be any, so the messaging is just going to be mini grants, and mini grants includes paying for grant writers and paying for application support. So that's how we're approaching that. And there might be some clarification around that, but it's really, that was a one time, and now the spirit of it lives inside of mini grants.
Rantis?
Yeah, sorry, I've been like trying to look for paper and to write my sort of my thoughts down. So a few thoughts and questions, and I don't expect like answers all now. I think central to this question about being responsive to community needs, you know, given that I think folks are hoping to spend money on staff time, I'm assuming staff capacity to potentially apply for future grants or do future scopes of work. You know, I just wanted to raise the question, like $5,000 isn't enough to do that. You know, potentially I think you're talking about smaller organizations who are talking about adding capacity, hiring like a contractor consultant to do this work, but even 5,000 is really, really stretching it. So I just want to like point that out, because I think if we were really being truly responsive here, I think we would be having a longer term conversation about evolving this program to be, you know, if it's really about added capacity, probably around ballpark $30,000, $50,000. So I just want to note that. I don't want to say that right now because I'm trying to extrapolate based on the responses here, but I would definitely want to hear more from community on this. Then just a few more points here. First-time applicants. So that, you know, eligibility is based on first-time applicants. I guess the question for me is, does that mean that for folks who've applied last round are not eligible for these mini grants? So I think that's a no. So, okay, that's helpful. And then I think just, you know, I think moving, I guess, just like additional comment and question here. I should have tried to write all these down. I think there is, and it would be great to get a visual on this or in writing, just how it works. But I think there's, to me, it seems like in conflict how you prioritize as well as doing random. And I think we've had this conversation last year, like what is random? Like, how do you do random? Like, are you, you know, is it like an algorithm? Are you, you know, what is random? You know, and how do you prioritize small organizations? And I think my last point, now I'm starting to remember here, my last point is, and maybe this is a longer term conversation, is how do we really just be more explicit in promoting BIPOC-led organizations? So I think that's just comment here, but I think if we're starting to see the disparities between how groups are being funded, groups that have been having access to PPP loans in last year, especially on the business side, like I think I should call the question here, like as we move into the next stage for PCEF, you know, I think race, you know, and ethnicity has been a key determinant of how folks have been impacted in the economy. So I just want to at least weigh in on my thoughts there.
Great, thanks, Ramfis. I think some of those are going to be bigger conversations. One piece that I'll say around the dollar amount is that city code says that 5,000 or less doesn't have to go back to city council for approval. So we have had discussions about how to creative ways of getting above the $5,000 threshold in a future ordinance that could potentially build some of that flexibility in. But the current constraint is that if we want it to move fast and not have to go to council each time, that's where the $5,000 is coming from. But we definitely have an eye towards evolving that into, you know, bigger numbers going forward. And there were some other, there are some other responses that I want to provide, but I'm also looking at time and some other hands. So there's some small clarifying points, Ramfis, that I would like to, I can just follow up with the committee to explain about the selection process and how some of those pieces work, if that's okay.
Great. We have Faith and then Maria.
Yeah, I'll just follow on to Ramses and say that the two kind of major things he raised are kind of, I love that this grant bucket exists. I don't think that we should put too much, I want there to be flexibility and for us to be nimble and to get this out. So I'm going to start with that. I do absolutely think that we should be prioritizing BIPOC-led organizations. And if it doesn't look like this is going to serve that, we shouldn't be doing it. And I think the capacity building is a great conversation. Like, we can't be providing $5,000 grants 4 times a year for adding staff capacity. For sure, like those need to be longer term, multi-year, right, in order to actually be building capacity and living wages for those. But I think that this could nonetheless serve a really important role of some training, right, potentially. Or, I mean, it's not about adding staff. I don't think that you're going to use this grant for that, but maybe there are other things. So that's a really great resource. I have a bunch of nitty-gritty questions. And so I'm going to list some of them because maybe when you come back to give us more, you'll identify this. I'm curious on and this is probably something we talked about a year ago, but why not add to an existing grant? It may well be that we find that there's a convening that's necessary associated with an existing grant that wasn't included in the original scope. So just curious why we landed on that. I'm curious how many grants that I can propose per cycle. I know that I can only be funded on one, but if we're doing a random selection, maybe I increase my chances if I submit 10. The eligibility, it feels subjective to me, so that feels harder. I know that are you a nonprofit or is your fiscal sponsor a nonprofit serving Portland? That's objective, but are you serving the PCEF goals of social and racial justice and climate change? That is a subjective determination, I think. So there's some work associated with that. And then as far as the like selection criteria, I got confused as to whether are you giving numbers per each of the category and you're going to select the numbers equal to the dollar amount for each of the categories? Are we thinking we fully fund one of the categories and then we fully fund the next category and then we fully fund the next category, kind of in a waterfall? So question about that. Random selection, Ramses raised that too. I don't know what that means. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
There are a couple of things in there, so I'm just gonna interject real quick. And I know Maria has had her hand up for a while, but I wanted to, I think that maybe Faith, if it's not like sort of a conversation stopper, if we could kind of provide a little bit more detail on like the mechanics of how the random selection happens, how the prioritized random selection happens. That would be great. If not, we can go back to that slide and maybe just walk through it. So I just kind of wanted to ask, like, do folks really feel like they need to understand that piece of it before moving forward? And if so, maybe we should take a break and then return to this conversation after. And if not, we can kind of get those mechanics to you afterwards. And then I think,
Katie, are you suggesting after we approve it? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no, yes.
Okay.
And so I think that is the question. If that's a piece that really needs to be more fully understood before you all would feel comfortable moving forward, then I think we should go back to that slide and just walk through that process a little bit more slowly. and recognizing that that might take a little bit of time, and we don't want to completely work through the break because we want to give you all the opportunity to chat with each other kind of per the plan. Then we could come back to this afterwards and staff can kind of put our heads together about the agenda while you all chat. What direction do you feel like we need to go in?
I guess, are you asking me?
I'm just kind of asking, yeah, you and Ramses brought up the random selection thing too, and then I wanted to turn it over to Maria.
My preference would be go to Maria first before we come back to that question.
Okay, Maria?
Great. It sounds like people have a lot of good detailed questions to ask. And my assessment is there is no mini grant subcommittee, which is why a lot of people have these really great reflections right now that have been building up since our last meeting. And I know that we have the slide up that says discussion and decision, and it's like neatly gives us like an action item. But I also want to know if there really is so much more discussion to be had, and if we can take up space in the breakouts to discuss this further or to stretch out this agenda item, I think it would be meaningful. I'm just worried that there's still a lot of mechanics to go through for people to feel comfortable to make their decision. And I want to know what like the consequences are if we really, we don't have that great orgasmic yes to say we want to support this. What does that look like as your timeline reflects announcements and outreach in May? We have limited times to fully discuss this as a public committee.
I think that it is, I think that Maria, maybe just to answer one of your questions, it really just sort of bumps the timeline, the amount of time that it takes for you all to feel comfortable making a decision. And right now, I think that's okay. It doesn't sort of bump up against anything else right now. I think one of the one thing that we kind of have our eye on is really wanting to try and get it out there so that people have time to be able to like receive awards and have the money in hand when the next RFP cycle goes out, so that they might be able to use it to help fund, to help pay for whatever they might need to put their application together, or a chunk of it. But I don't think that, having an action taken at the next committee meeting, I don't think that we, blow that potential synergy by doing that, by bumping it out a couple weeks. So I appreciate that. Robin?
Yeah, I kind of second what Maria just said. I have my list of questions here. I've been kind of putting on pause because I know I'm often the first person to ask questions, and some of my fellow committee members asked a lot of my questions, but I have quite a few more, and I get the sense that some of these issues, we're not going to be addressing today. So at the same time, I feel compelled to get the money out the door ASAP, but I just feel like there's a lot of questions. Like I said, I still have more questions, and I can ask them now, or we can discuss them in another forum. But yeah, I just wanted to react to Maria's comment.
How about, can I make a suggestion? And Sam, you can chime in also if you think this is a bad idea. But Robin, I think it would be great if you said your questions out loud in this meeting, just so they're kind of, the members of the public can hear them, and so that they're kind of recorded in the minutes. But then also, and we can take the questions that we've heard from everyone, that everyone else has already said, and then we can also just ask you all, if you think of something later, to email in your questions. And then we can use those to help inform information that we'll bring back to you at the next meeting. Does that feel like a good path right now? Okay, I'm seeing enough nodding in the up and down and not the other direction, that I'm gonna go with that plan. And so Robin, ask you just to sort of say your questions out loud, and then we'll move into the break, which is just for committee members. You'll be separated into groups of 3, and it really is just like social time for you to get to know each other a little bit better. So Robin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this quick. I think first is why just $400,000? Is that sufficient? I'm curious about the demand for these grants. In the past, I think we had too much, or we had a lot of demand and didn't have enough. So kind of why just $400,000? Why not more? Why not less? Kind of curious around that. I think when we were reviewing the grants, the bigger grants, right? There were a lot of initiatives and grant requests that were extremely, in my mind, important, but at the same time, not really aligned with the PCEF mission. And so I was kind of curious, what's the criteria? Is there any type of screening for that? It could be a great organization, great purpose, but the purpose of the funding is just not aligned with PCEF, and yet then it seems like they're going to be randomly chosen to potentially receive funding. So kind of curious about that. Is there some reporting? And I want to keep reporting minimum, right? But did the money that we put out last time, was it used for its intended purpose? And was that aligned with PCEF? I'd like to hear a little bit more about the lessons learned from the last round of small grants. What went well, what didn't went well. Maybe you guys, staff already kind of contemplated that, incorporated into this year's plan. But I'd like to hear, a little bit about what that feedback was, and how that feedback was incorporated into this version of small grants. And I think the rest were kind of covered by other folks, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. And it looks like there's a little change of plans. We're gonna go into 2 groups of 4. So just so you know. And Michael, I appreciate you. Michael's putting questions into the chat, and so I'm just gonna read those out loud for folks who aren't tracking that. Can we get fast reporting on who applied and who was awarded each quarter? Why can't folks apply for mini grants more than once? So we'll add those to the sort of list that informs the information that we bring when we come back on the 19th. So Lockie is now going to zip you all committee members into breakout rooms, and you will have 20 minutes. Sorry.
Faith has a hand
Sam,
up
go
still.
ahead.
Did you see Faith's hand?
No, I did not even see that. Sorry. Faith, go ahead.
Yeah. My hand kind of disappears into the yellow circle on my wall, so sorry. I have a proposal. Maybe we should share it after we come back from break. Maybe I'll try it out on a few community members and see what they think about the proposal. Maybe that works. It's an adjustment or an amendment to your proposal, Katie.
Oh, okay. That sounds fine. But just to clarify, in these breakout rooms, the public is not going to be participating. It's just other committee members.
And what I would add is take the first 5 minutes out. I don't feel you need to take the first 5 minutes and take a real break, then come back for 15. That was the intent for the space.
Yeah. So we will come back. We'll reconvene at 7:22. Right. Thank you all. All right. Welcome back, everyone. So hopefully everyone had a good break and is feeling refreshed. Faith, right before the break, you said that you had an amendment to the suggestion or a thought that you wanted to offer. So I wanted to see if that had, where you were with that. Oh.
Yeah, I wanted to suggest that we do collect feedback on the questions that were raised, and in part to do that to see if that makes if that requires or offers an opportunity for any changes that staff would identify to the proposal that's already out there. And that also we may decide that we know that we're unlikely to get, there are no perfect answers. Angela offered that already, right? There may not be perfect answers or perfect way of getting the results or of deciding in advance that we're going to be able to get the results. So maybe what we're fine is saying go, but we want to pause after the first round or possibly after the second round, if that's inappropriate after the first round, to say we want to understand what we received and do a real evaluation on that before deciding to move forward, because we can then make adjustments then, so that we're not committing to $400,000 on this untried platform with quite little review, not only little review of committee, but little review of staff, and instead saying we want to do a reflection earlier in the process, like after the first round. So that was my proposal. And we didn't get much time to talk about it in my group, and I took too much of that time anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Faith. I think that is a great suggestion. So I don't know that I think that we're still have sort of the same plan for tonight, or sort of for today and maybe the next meeting, which is that we want to get your input. We have what you have already said, but also for committee members to, send us in questions. Members of the public who are listening in, send us in your questions. And comments, and we will sort of compile much of what we have heard. We do have answers to. So a lot of that will be relatively easy. There are a couple of sticky items which will be, I think, a good conversation for the next committee meeting. And yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Faith, that there wasn't something else implied when you said collect feedback that you were asking for there. Collecting feedback on questions that were raised. Okay, that's good. Okay, great. Okay, well, now I'm going to turn it over to Sam, so the agenda, the timeline on our agenda is not what it was at the beginning of the meeting, and so we're just going to roll with it. Sam is going to sort of present material for about 25 minutes. Our intention then was that we would go into breakout rooms. Public and staff can observe. There will be a staff person who is there to take notes in each of the breakout rooms, but that you all sort of do an exercise after that 25-minute presentation that Sam's going to give, and then we can all come back as a large group and kind of report out on the breakout discussion. So that's the plan. The last item on the agenda, that's sort of talking a little bit about beginning to talk about the threshold review, I think is going to just be moved to the next meeting. That sound good? Okay, now I'm all paranoid about missing people's hands because I feel like they're invisible to me tonight. But okay, I'm going to turn it over to Sam.
Okay. Thank you. All right. I think Kitty just set the stage. As we jump to the next few slides, I'm just going to ask just to move through this, that generally speaking, that we hold the questions and that you hold them for the breakout rooms. But if there are specific clarifying points, let's get them through. If it's just something that's right there and you're like, let me get that, I missed that. But with that, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. So in this slide, we pulled this slide together because we wanted to give you all a sense for our current funding as well as our projected future funding. When this program was a ballot measure, the fund was expected to bring in and I say just, but $30 million a year. If you look back at what was originally in the ballot content, it was $30 million a year. Once the fund became a reality, revenue divisions took the ballot language and fine-tuned it with everyone that was subject to it and updated the projections to $54 to $71 million. And then City Council took some actions and ultimately brought that back down, those projections, to $44 to $71 million. That's still a super wide range. Well, what I can say here is that now, and I think earlier this week you had seen a number that seemed to be more certainty, and been this constant going back and forth with our city budget office as well as the revenue division. But what we're seeing is that the revenues for really calendar tax year 2019 is likely going to be in the $50 to $70 million range. This is hard, and we're not going to get that certainty for a little while longer, in part because even though most taxpayers have finally reconciled their tax year 2019 tax filings, some haven't that are on different fiscal year ends. And so there's still this uncertainty, and this is going to be the uncertainty that we're going to negotiate for a little while longer. Now, the current fund balance, though, and you folks have seen this, but in the news earlier, I think it was reported 113 million. I can share as of last week, the current fund balance is actually over 150 million. And so what does that mean? In that 150 million, a majority of that, over 100 million of that is unreconciled. And I'm just giving this to give a little flavor. I hope that we're not going to get too detailed in this because I can't, there's many of these pieces. But what that means is that in that fund balance, it holds 2019 tax year revenues. It holds prepayments for 2020 tax year that haven't been reconciled. It holds quarterly prepayments for tax year 2021. It also holds carry forward payments that are meant for future years that folks have overpaid and said, here, hold it for future years. And because this is a new tax mechanism and it hasn't been reconciled, there's going to be instances where folks have overpaid, underpaid, all of that. And those adjustments are going to come as folks are just making those estimates in these first rounds. So, and COVID was, as you all know, just as 2020 was a crazy year in terms of making some of those projections and those estimates. But so that's sort of where we stand. But the general gist is that we're probably, I suspect we're going to have a healthy balance to be working with, and that balance is going to continue to grow year over year. Now, in this next funding cycle, in our budget for this next fiscal year, we've got budgeted $60 million to go out the door. That will likely be, if we keep on track, and we will likely get those out the door and executed into grant contracts and DPOs, which are designated purchase orders issued so that the funds become tied up into a grant agreement. Those will likely be dispersed in April, May of 2022. Even at that point, we will likely still be, just because of the flow of resources that are coming in, we'll probably still have a fund balance of about $100 million. And so our long-term aim in terms of our fund balance is probably $60 to $70 million, so that we're always rhyming and having a fund balance that aligns with what we push out in a given year. And so what I just would share is beyond in the next couple of fiscal years, we are going to be releasing probably closer to $80 million a year after this fiscal year in order to draw that fund balance down. So just set the stage so folks know there's still uncertainty, and that's the challenge of putting firm numbers out there. But this gives a little flavor for this. And so this last bullet point on this slide that I note, and there was a question that came up for I know some committee members, is when we fund multi-year proposals. So this past year we were allowed to fund, we could fund up to 5 years. And per city code, you can fund any grant agreement or any contract agreement up to 5 years. So our large grants are up to 5 years. If we awarded $1 million grant over 5 years, all of that allocation would come out of this year's 8.6 million. So it's sort of earmarked out of this year, and that's how we set aside. So we're not touching future years. So the next year, it's another set of resources we've got to allocate. Okay. So I think I just wanted to make sure that folks, these are just important to set the stage, because it's just so that folks have a sense of the scale of resources that will be coming in on an ongoing basis. Okay, next slide. So during our last meeting, we laid out a timeline and a plan for 2 RFPs in the coming fiscal year, beginning July 1st. As I know, as I came out of that meeting, hearing a lot of your reflections, including certainly staff reflections that we had after that, you know, I certainly took a step back and laid out some of the rationale that we had originally put together for the 2 RFPs. What came out of that was a realization that 2 RFPs this next round did not fully afford us some of the benefits we were hoping for. You know, the ideal point of having 2 RFPs was, one, it was responsive to community desires for multiple funding opportunities in a year. But 2 RFPs, if spaced 6 months apart, would allow us the ability, and it would allow us the ability to give feedback to unfunded proposals in one round so that they could turn around and actually apply for a second round without waiting for a full year. Given the spacing we had projected, it really didn't afford potential applicants that benefit to be able to hear back and actually turn around and apply. And then 2 RFPs ideally accommodate seasonality and busy period for certain sectors, which oftentimes it may be the summer sector, but it gives a different time window. So what we're laying out, what we've come back to, and this is different from the last meeting, and this is just a recognition that these are some of the changes that we're recommending 1 RFP this year, 60 million going on to 1 RFP in August, September. Frankly, at this point, we're probably talking about September. And then moving to a 6-month cycle there on out. So the next RFP would be released in February, March, and that would be half of what we'd be giving out in the fiscal year. And so, you know, even this plan certainly has challenges as it relates to our ability to plan effectively and align potential community reviewers and have a firm timeline to preserve our ability to do all the other work around the RFP that's needed to make sure folks are ready, folks are hearing about the opportunity. I mean, this is the fundamental challenge of our work, particularly as we're starting up and as we're building the program and continuing to build the program, is just our ability to communicate clear timelines for both the public and frankly, the team as well to be able to effectively plan their work. So what I just show here is that, you know, I know that these things will be smoothed out over time as we do have a better sense for the work that's needed and as we build our systems and just get in a regular rhythm of doing this. But the table down below presents just a little bit of that flow. What you see in the orange boxes is generally when we would be releasing an RFP, we'd be opening it for 2 months. In the blue boxes, you see when there's an RFP review period. And then in the green boxes, when you see staff will be onboarding grantees. And then it begins again, orange, blue, green. And so it just gives you a sense that between probably the onboarding of the second RFP, as well as the beginning of the review of the third RFP, that's going to be a point where our grant team, you know, and the technical experts there may not be able to be part of the technical review and may need to be able to, we probably will need to be looking into external contractors as part of that. So it's just to give a sense that different folks on different teams are going to be pulled in different times. But this would be generally the type of rhythm we'd like to be able to get into and to start to be able to clearly signal for folks so that folks can plan and plan both their budgets, their planning overall around some of these timelines. Okay, next slide. Which brings us to something different. Scaling up considerations. I have 3 tables here that we've put together. And really, they show different numbers of grants and average grant values. The first table on the top left, it shows what we funded in RFP 1. We had 29 planning grants that were average size of about $90,000. We had 7 small grants, average 165, 9 large grants, average about $550,000. The second table now to the right at the top in the red font, now that shows what would be the case if we took what we did in year 1 and scaled it up directly to $60 million. And I'm doing this, we're doing this to be just demonstrative of the fact that it would be about, you'd see roughly about 300 grants coming through if we directly scale that up. Not that that's exactly what we would do, but just to demonstrate, because as for me, based on my internal measures, that I felt round 1 was certainly a success, but I want to recalibrate us as well to acknowledge that as we move from 8.6 million to 60 million, we are going to have to change things. And so in that way, we're going to have to go, there's just a similar learning process. And so, there's a third table then that I present here in the bottom center in green font, which just, it's an example table, it's an example scenario, but it gives you a better sense of, let me see, where are my notes here? It gives you a better sense of sort of the volume and the grant sizes that we need to see align to align with our management capacity. And this is really, while this is really about, and what you see here skewed is there's going to be a lot more from a dollar volume large grants, and we're going to talk about the actual grant cap values, but this just gives you starting to give you a little bit of a sense for that. And it adds up to $60 million, and it's roughly based on how each project manager onboarding about 25 grantees and managing on an additional 25 grantees each year. So that's sort of what that's targeting, is that 25. And so those numbers are not there, but they're meant to give you just a sense for the kind of breakdown that we're going to need to have in order to right size as we go to $60 million. So you're going to, what this is effectively showing is that we're going to need to start seeing more large grants, and this is going to play into the grant cap conversation. And so, this isn't the exact balance, but it gives you a sense. And so while I expect many POC-led organizations to apply and be awarded large grants, I also believe that it's likely that we're going to see more mainstream organizations as a percentage of the total funding. All right, and I'll add this last piece. This is something that the expectation of large grants was something that the drafters of the initiative knew, and as I've reflected back and had some of my check-ins, folks, they knew that it would take time and often likely take time for people of color-led organizations to grow and develop the capacity to implement projects at volume and scale of then $30 million and certainly $60 million. It's frankly, it's exactly why they included a floor of 20%. In the code, they said 20% of the funding would go to nonprofit organizations, shall go to nonprofit organizations with a stated mission and track record of programs that benefit historically disadvantaged community members, people of color, women, folks with disabilities, and chronically underemployed. So this is just to start help reorienting ourselves. And so I want to move to the next slide. We'll talk about grant caps, and then we'll send you all into the breakout rooms to discuss. And we've got a couple questions to seed for you all. So this is now around half of the applications last round were, for planning grants. The remainder were evenly split between small and large grants. So we knew this as we did a lot of our outreach, that there was a good amount of demand for all the funding levels. So what we're recommending here is that planning grants, that the cap remain at $100,000 and that we keep it as a very simple application. We recommend leaving that as is. It's, most of the planning grants were at the very early stages of the process that were reviewed, and many were new organizations. So it felt like the application structure that we have was rightly sized. Requiring additional information at this application stage may create barriers to these applicants accessing PCEF funds. For small grants, there was more work involved in this application, and because what we saw overall between the small and large grants, we saw that the average value of total implementation grants was, I think, around $350,000. So we're recommending increasing the small grant cap from $200,000 to about $500,000. 75% of the small grants were for over $100,000, and 45% of all of the grants were for $500,000 or less. And so this application level of information could be increased slightly, but still remain lower than large grants in order to sort of potentially, if there's a desire to ask a little bit more. And then for large grants, this was the most involved application. We are recommending increasing the cap to 10 million. This is roughly, originally when we proposed $1 million, so $8.6 million allocation, it was because we wanted to see at least a certain minimum distribution of the grants, so there's at least a certain amount of organizations getting the funding. And so this is sort of trying to rightly balance that, and this is roughly proportional to what 60 million would be to what we did with a $1 million cap for $8.6 million RFP round. So I want that all to sink in. We've got a couple of questions, but before we send you all into the breakout rooms, and I suspect, Katie, I'm moving faster, I think, than I expected, right?
Yes. We're not entirely caught up, but yes, you are moving a little bit faster. So if there are clarifying questions, there's time for that. But I also just wanted to ask, we changed the other breakout, we changed from 3 to 2 groups. Does the committee, do you have a preference of going into, does 4 work for you? Does that feel like a small enough group to kind of be conversational and easier? Yeah. Okay, then let's move. So when we go to breakout, we'll move to 2. We'll just have 2 groups instead of 3. So I just wanted to get that clarity. But if there are questions for Sam now, we could maybe spend a couple of minutes answering those before moving into the breakouts.
Yeah, and I've got a couple comments before we send you out in the breakout, and just a couple of questions that we're going to prompt for you in the breakout. So, yeah, maybe before we jump right in, I'd love really clarifying questions about the slides I've presented before, holding off the discussion for you all in the breakout groups. Michael.
Oops, sorry.
Can you remind me if we had reporting tied to dollar amounts or to whether it was a small or large grant, and how this would affect the reporting and the requirements?
Sorry, Michael, keep going.
And like the requirements for prevailing wage, requirements for reporting, and all those things. I can't remember if that was tied to the type of grant it was or to the dollar amounts.
There are certain reporting requirements that are tied to dollar amounts. They're mostly, so there is a requirement to use the B2G and LCP platforms if you have a construction project at a single site that is $500,000 or greater. So that's one reporting requirement. Or sorry, what, Sam?
200. It's 200. I think
it's
or
200,000. There's another threshold that is 500,000. Sorry, getting my thresholds mixed up.
And I guess it's all tied to dollar amounts and not to the definition of small or large grant, right?
That's right.
Okay, that's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, just to clarify, it's the trigger for us is $300,000, correct? So if it's capped, if small grants are capped at $200,000, Michael, I think it becomes enrolled in large. But I just want to clarify. I think the dollar threshold is 300 per our policy.
It's 350, Ramses.
Sorry. So many numbers. But I guess my question is, as we change the caps, it's not going to change the reporting and prevailing wage requirements.
No. Anything? Oh, Robin?
Yeah. Sam, did you say anything about the allocations for these 3 types of grants, or is that a conversation for a later time?
I think what I want to acknowledge is that what we're going to have to, in part, when we go to 60 million, and I hope that was coming across, and I think that's exactly. I think that's part and parcel of the discussion you all should be thinking through. We are, in order to right size sort of the types of grants, our ability to administer them, we're going to need to send a clear signal around our expectation in some form or another of large grants. That's a big difference. That we're going to need to signal that we expect to see large grants, and we can discuss in future meetings around what that looks like in terms of whether that's actually saying we need to, whether we're actually designating a certain amount of funds. What the one designation you all made last round was at least 1.5 million in planning grants. So we can add to that and clarify how much we'll expect to fund in large grants and smaller in smaller grants and planning grants. So it's that you will need to see large grants, and I want to acknowledge that there may be dissonance there for you. It certainly was for folks on the team as we had these discussions internally. It's this fine tuning. This is going to take. It's certainly going to take time, and so Anyways, I'll come back to that before and come back to some of the questions that we hope you can focus on in your, or you can walk into in your breakout groups. Robin, did that answer that question? Probably more than you needed.
Kind of. I'll take it as yes for now.
Oh, I had another question. Forgot.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michael. And then Megan.
Did Megan have a question before me? I was a little slow there.
You could have gone, Michael, but anyway, since just to go for it, I'll just ask Sam. I don't know if I missed it. It's not on the slide, but like you gave kind of a rationale for the planning grant and small grant caps and the 1 million to 10 million. Is there, besides just we've got a lot of money to give away, and this would be an easy way to give away a lot of money, is there like any way the team came up with that number?
It really, it is. Meg, it kind of lines with the rationale around that. We know that, generally speaking, we know that there is going to be probably some large multifamily type retrofit projects that'll certainly be in the $2 to $3 million range. But then there's probably going to be folks that are going to be applying to pull together funds potentially to be able to support in a way that we are not necessarily as nimble, if that makes sense. There's going to be other structures that'll be out there where folks are pulling together a larger set to say, we're going to retrofit all of these sorts of buildings. And so it's sort of recognizing that you're going to have individual projects that will come in at that level, but you also have folks that'll be pulling together applications to go after many things. And that'll probably come in, just suspect in that 10 million would probably accommodate that. So it's really, there isn't, unfortunately, as much as I'd like. And I think we'll get a good sense for what the capacity is, but it's also recognizing that for the scale of resources, we're gonna need to see a certain amount of large grants, and that doesn't all have to be a $3 million grant. It could be a couple $7 million grants. That's just and so it's to give room to see what comes in after as we set that.
Michael.
So as we look at this and how does your 5% cap on overhead affecting the need to pull some $10 million grants? Are you bumping up against that 5% cap already, or are there multiple things that have to happen at the same time?
I think I'm sure we'll hear from we'll hear more publicly from the auditor's office soon. I think the reality is that the 5% is in some ways related to our ability to administer, is related to the ideal breakdown. I don't think you would ever see a scenario. I think it would be hard for just the various people that envision this, a scenario where PCEF was funding 300 grants. So on the other extreme, I think that there probably wasn't really a scenario out there where we've got an administrative structure that can support that. On the other end of it, yes, the 5% is absolutely relevant to coming up with a number that's like 75 feels right about right. And right now, I feel comfortable. I mean, there's a little bit of, we've got flexibility for another fiscal year to exceed our 5% cap. We fortunately have Jason Ford coming on board, and so there's a good chunk of work for him to set way on in terms of how we define this work and working with. So there's a little bit of defining that stuff. I feel comfortable that we're under our 5% cap right now, but it certainly, that 5% cap plays into, with what we have right now, we could administer 75 comfortably coming into the program every year. Assuming that, and there's even assumptions baked into that in terms of the level of effort associated with those 75, that they're not all super intensive grantees where we've got to do a lot of hand holding, that, half of them are pretty simple, understand how to work with the city, have all the pieces lined up.
Okay. I have a follow-up question, but I'm going to save it for a bit.
All right. So let's move into the breakouts now, but maybe instead of breaking it, we had 20 minutes on the breakout, but maybe let's move into the breakouts for 15 minutes so that we can come back and have kind of a little bit more time as a full group. I think we do have two questions, kind of two prompts for the discussion that we wanted to talk with you. So now that we have only two groups, I think maybe, and a little bit less time, we can split those in half. And so group one can sort of start with the prompt number one, and group number two can start with prompt number two. And you'll be able to see which number you're in when Lockie moves you into a group. So let's do that now. Yeah, and apologies for members of the public. You should be able to also observe the breakout groups, and so an option should have appeared on your if you're on Zoom. For folks who are for folks who are watching on YouTube, there's not an option there, but there should be a little square that is full of squares should have appeared in your Zoom menu. And that allows you to move into the different breakout groups. Oh, I see people disappearing, so I'm assuming that works.
See folks moving there. And Katie, do we have a break slide? Yeah.
We do. We can go back to the old break slide.
Oh, we got another one.
Oh, we do. Look at that.
Okay. Are you keeping track? Let me see time here. They've been in there for at least a couple minutes, right?
So they should come back at 8:10. I think giving them 15 minutes from right now makes sense.
Okay. Well, let's do the warning in. Let's do the warning in 15 minutes. Let's give them a 2-minute warning in 15 minutes.
Okay.
Signal that.
Sam, I'm going to join one of the breakout rooms and listen if that is okay.
Please do. Please do. I'll sit back. And for folks that are remaining in this space, if you have any questions just about how to access the breakout rooms, feel free to chime in, and we'll see if we can help you navigate that. Hi, Rose.
I have a question. It's asking me to wait. I'll be assigned to a breakout room.
So let's see, Rose. We can also, I think we can assign. How about this? We'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and assign you to a room if that's what you're looking to. I can assign you to a room, and then you'll get the prompt and you'll go. So you'll see it now. Do you have a prompt that's saying join a breakout room? There we go. Okay. If anyone else needs any assistance in getting into a breakout room, please let me know. I'm gonna turn off my video, folks, but still here. Anything comes up. All right, pulling you all back into the ethers.
It's like Star Trek, you're beaming
Okay.
us back up.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep this slide up here, and yes, Katie, I'll turn it back to you. Welcome back, folks. Oh, you're muted, Katie.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Hello, welcome back from the breakout. Sam, I don't think we don't have any other slides we're gonna cover because the rest of the slides are on the threshold review, so we could even just turn the slides off if you wanted to make it easier for folks to like see the Zoom boxes. Okay. So it's 8:16 and we're now all back in the room together. Is there anyone from, I guess, either of the breakout groups who wanted to kind of share a little bit of the conversation that was had there and in the time that we have remaining? I would like to leave at least maybe 5 minutes at the end for kind of committee comments before we close the meeting. So anyone want to share some thoughts?
Megan.
Well, I was going to urge Maria or Robin to chime in from my group.
I was going to urge Angela to, she took the notes for us.
Yeah, Angela, you probably have it in front of you. You can probably give the highlights a little better than we could.
Okay, I'm gonna do some little sound bites. Okay, so how do we give support to organizations to make sure they feel capable and comfortable of going after the grants that they want to? What does support mean? Does it mean an on-ramping over time? Does it mean mini grants? Does it mean getting some small grants to work up to a large grant? There may be orgs doing anti-poverty work that includes things like disability, but they're not naming it in those words. Let's see, there was a lot of conversation around capacity building, who is providing the capacity building so that orgs feel like they can see themselves in the clean energy world. There was discussion about the idea of the clean energy fund sounding like something that folks can't relate to. So how do we bridge that and get folks to move over and maybe even expand some of the work that they've been doing? And then I'll maybe just capture the last question that was put out there was the question that was posed. Question number one was, who do we consult, people in orgs? And there was a feeling that the committee doesn't know who is already sort of on the list, who's already being consulted, who we're in relationship with. And in general, also the committee feeling a little bit separated from the experience of the community groups that are going through the application process. And so how to get a better understanding of that experience. Jump in with more stuff.
All right, is there anyone from group number 2 who's interested in kind of sharing a summary of the conversation in there? Some highlights or lowlights?
I think I'll try to take a stab at it. I'm not sure I'll capture everything, but I think there's always generally, I think, concern what this means as we grow an organization, some of the as we grow the funding caps, and so I think there's both concern and optimism. I think some of the things items we talked about is just being intentional in how we engage with tenant advocates, workers, First Nations, tribal groups on these conversations as we try to design this outcome, try to challenge the culture of how we meet together, I think getting to engage with staff and the broader community is sort of, if we're in the stream phase, to really learn and listen, because I think we just need to challenge ourselves and not just be a thought bubble here. So I think there is really a missed opportunity where we're really not hearing the thoughts of staff on these meetings, and we're really not hearing the thoughts from the broader community on some of the questions that we're being tasked to address and fix. And I think lastly, additionally, I think some of the problems we're being tasked to try to solve here and with PCEF, really, we need other institutions to step up, both, I think, Energy Trust, City, Metro, Port of Portland, Multnomah County, and PCC. Like, I think, if we're not aligned around some of our workforce equity goals, contract equity, trying to address and move the ball forward on addressing climate, then I think a lot of our efforts are for naught, knowing there are systemic issues that exist right now for who's benefiting in our investments addressing climate. And I think just lastly, I think this was noted earlier around the 5% administrative costs. I think there's a conflict between how we administer this funds and it being capped and the true engagement that we kind of expect for how PCEF would engage. And I just want to just add this because I sometimes forget to say this. I really value the work of staff, and the relationship that the broader community has is directly with staff. And if we don't have the sufficient capacity to be there and truly engage with folks and truly hear their feedback, we're not stewarding these dollars well. So I just want to note that I think just the importance of that, and knowing that how PCEF is staffed is nowhere comparable to how other funding institutions are staffed. So we didn't go in that discussion, but it was a thought that I just forgot that I just wanted to share here. So I'll pause there. Colleagues, I don't know if there's anything else I missed. I see Faith there. Faith?
Yeah, one thing I'll add that came up, it wasn't named this way, but came up in our conversation in a couple of ways, is that this might be a false choice presented as to whether or not, or how we're going to make sure that communities are engaged in a mainstream funded large project. We might not need to change the balance of where the funds go, and we may not be willing to. So that might be a false choice. Just wanted to name that that's not the only possible outcome, that large grants go to mainstream organizations that are already currently funded. So.
Any other thoughts? Thank you all. Thanks, Faith and Renpeace. Before we get closing comments from committee members, Sam, is there anything that you wanted to say or add before we close out?
No, I really just appreciate hearing these pieces, and we'll see. I mean, this is the conversations. There's many layers of depth to them, and it's always challenging to be able to fully do justice to them in our 2.5, 3 hour chunks that we have with you all. So I appreciate all this, and know that we're certainly hearing all this, certainly thinking about a lot of these pieces, and so thank you. Thank you for spending an evening with us when it was so nice outside.
Any closing comments from committee members?
I do. I recall in our previous meeting, staff had done the work of furnishing an updated org chart, just showing the breadth of everybody's skills and where you all sit in the PCEF team. I think this is also something we were interested in as committee co-chairs. Michael and I were thinking about, defining the committee members' roles, and for folks to know just a little bit about folks' skill sets and where we're focusing on as subcommittee members, just how we're spread out in the work. I think that's like an ongoing piece of information that we want to have current, and to capture like where we have been in the past year and what that could look like moving forward, as everybody here has made such large contributions. I think it's good for us to kind of take stock of where everyone's contributing as well, and seeing what the workload could look like moving forward as we've started to opt for areas of PCEF that we want to focus more of our time to. So thanks, staff, for all the time and thought into making these meetings happen, being flexible when we have and need more time to do some things in this public space.
Thanks, Maria. All right, well, thank you all for your time and for giving us an extra half hour, which we're going to ask for again next time. Oh, Sam wants to lead a clapping exercise, it appears.
I'm just calling it, I'm bringing it back in.
Oh,
I'm not trying to lead it. I'm looking at Ramses, actually.
Ramsey.
Megan-
Oh, is this
Megan
okay?
got her
Can you
hand
do
up.
it every time?
There's a lot of
And Megan has her
delegating
hand up,
happening.
Everybody needs to unmute though, if that happens. And I would invite the public to unmute too, if you want to do.
Also, Megan had
Megan
a hand up.
Megan, why is your hand invisible to me
I lowered
today?
it down,
Megan,
but
sorry.
after my very brief comment is just that I appreciated the attention, like the more breakout room discussion opportunities in the last couple meetings. I definitely I like that. Thank you for those of you who pushed for that and made it happen. So before we clap, that's my just kudos. Thank you.
Well, yeah. Well, I want to make sure that we let other folks lead this in the future. But again, this was for folks who are new in the call who missed this in the last meeting. It was a recommendation. I recommended that we try to end meetings with a unity clap. So the unity clap has history in the farm worker labor movement. It was a way to unite both the Filipino and Latino farm workers to sort of build community and unity and solidarity around similar and shared goals around improving the rights and conditions for farm workers. And for folks who are not well versed in labor movement, farm workers are not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. So just organizing around farm worker issues and folks in the service sector, it's due to historical racism. But again, I think the idea of the unity clap is we start a slow clap and try to get in unison, and the clap will slowly get louder and quicker. And I think that's how we will try to close out. So I will try this this time, and I'm going to ask someone in the committee to lead it next time. And maybe we'll get someone in the audience to lead it for us. So I'll start the clap. And everyone has to unmute themselves. So, all right, here we go. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ramses. Bye, everyone. Thanks, all. Have a wonderful evening.
Hey, everyone.
Good night, everyone.